GPB, winner of 11 Emmy Awards, including Station Excellence. Thank you for your support.
The 2012 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you live from Georgia Public Broadcasting, the Democratic race for the 5th Congressional District.
Good evening. I'm John Sherrick, reporter with WXIA-TV in Atlanta. We'd like to welcome our viewers, our listeners on GPB Radio, and our live studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the debate between the Democratic candidates in Georgia's 5th Congressional District. The 5th Congressional District covers parts of Clayton, DeKalb, and Fulton counties. Some of the largest cities are Atlanta, East Point, and Forest Park. Now to the candidates. They are in alphabetical order. Michael Johnson, he has served Georgia as a Superior Court judge, and John Lewis, who currently represents the 5th Congressional District. He declined our invitation for this debate, and he's represented by the empty lectern. In the first round, Michael Johnson will answer a question from one of our three panelists. In the second round, he'll ask a question of his absent opponent. And in the third round, the panelists will continue to question the candidate. Finally, the candidate will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. Before we get started, let's meet our three panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. We have Jim Galloway, political columnist with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We have Peralt Paul, editor of EastAtlantaPatch.com. And our final panelist is Nanette Sosa. She's an award-winning reporter for WYAY, All News 106.7 Radio in Atlanta. Now let's get started with the debate. In the first round, the candidate will be asked a question by one of our panelists. He'll have 60 seconds to answer the question. Jim Galloway will ask the first question of Michael Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You have decided to run against a long-time incumbent. Clearly, you think voters of the 5th District are missing out on something. What is that something, and how can you provide it?
Well, absolutely. That's a great question, Jim. Thank you. One of the things that I have seen over the last several years, particularly having served as a judge, is you see what happens to our hardworking families when our citizens fall through the cracks when they don't have a job. They lose their homes, and in some instances, they lose their families. I've had the opportunity to see what happens to our young men and women when they don't receive a quality education and they end up on the wrong side of the law. I made the decision that I wanted to do more. I wanted to have a greater impact with respect to the challenges that we're facing on the front end, and we do have a lot of challenges. Here in the 5th Congressional District, we have one of the highest foreclosure rates in the country, one of the highest child poverty rates in the country, tremendous, significant transportation needs, and we have been one of the worst congressional districts in the state in terms of securing federal funds for investment in our district. I want to go to Washington to bring back those funds for our district, to invest in our community for our citizens.
Mr. Johnson, thank you. We're going to stay with our format. It's now time for our candidate to ask a question of his absent opponent. You'll have 30 seconds for the question and 30 seconds for the rebuttal to the answer that you think Mr. Lewis would have given. So, Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Sure. If our current representative had bothered to show up, I would have asked him, in a time when Americans are really and truly hurting, in a time when we have suffered through one of the worst financial crisis in our history, in a time when our citizens want really good stewards of our taxpayer dollars because every dollar is stretched, why is it that our current representative was the only member out of 435 members of the House to overspend his congressional budget in 2011?
And how do you anticipate he would have answered that question? How would you rebut that?
Well, one of the things that I would say very simply is he has been absent in terms of being a good steward of our taxpayer dollars. We have not had the leadership in terms of speaking with specifics on our tax code. We have not had leadership in terms of specifics with respect to Social Security. The 5th Congressional District, the Atlanta metropolitan area, DeKalb County, and Clayton County need a voice for the 5th Congressional District. I will be that voice for them.
That concludes our second round. For those who may be joining us in progress, we are in the debate between the candidates in the Democratic primary for Georgia's 5th Congressional District. Incumbent John Lewis was unable to join us this evening. For our third round, we're going to return to our panel of journalists who will ask questions of Mr. Johnson. The candidate will then be allowed 60 seconds to respond. We begin this round of questions from Peralt Paul.
Judge Johnson, you've said that access to water is a key campaign issue for you. Given Georgia's population growth as well as neighboring states in Florida and Alabama, which have engaged in a three-way battle over water, what specific proposals do you have to address this?
One of the things that we have been lacking is leadership. And for quite some time, I have thought that we have needed to develop reservoirs throughout the state of Georgia, and specifically with respect to the 5th Congressional District, because our needs respecting water are going to grow tremendously over the next 10, 20 years. And that's something that we simply have not had from our current representative. We need leadership, and one of the things that I would have proposed, and I will propose as your next Congress member, is to get those federal dollars to invest here to help us build out our infrastructure, build up reservoirs, so that we will have water needs for now and well into the future.
A question now from Nanette Sosa.
Georgia this year is finally implementing the tax-free holiday, and it's to help parents and get kids back to school with some savings. Do you support this? And yes or no? The why or the why not?
Well, first of all, that's a question that hits close to home for my wife and I, because we are raising 2 young children who have attended public schools. Yes, I do support the tax-free holiday because it gives our hard-working families who are at this time really struggling, it gives them the opportunity to go out and get things for their children without having to worry about the added expense with respect to taxes. Now, we may actually miss that tax base on the back end, but at the end of the day, we're going to be putting taxes into the system, putting dollars into the system. And so I do support the tax-free holiday.
Now a question from Jim Galloway.
Mr. Johnson, we are rapidly steering toward a mammoth debate over the federal deficit and federal spending, regardless of who is in the White House next year. Right now, the Simpson-Bowles Debt Commission has recommended and this is the best thing we've got going so far, is a mixture of revenue increases and heavy cuts to entitlements, including Medicare. What cuts to these entitlements would you be willing to tolerate if this effort moves forward?
Well, first of all, I do believe that the Simpson-Bowles plan is a great piece of bipartisan legislation. It's not a perfect piece, but it is a great piece. But here's what I would look at instead of looking at Social Security and Medicare, because I absolutely believe that our seniors have worked hard for those and put the money into the system, and they deserve to get the money out of the system that they have put into it. I would actually first look at the Defense Department, and I have actually read special Pentagon reports where they have specifically named a number of areas where we can make cuts. For an example, we've got 80,000 troops spread across Europe. We can actually reduce that to 20,000 troops. That would help us save tremendously. We've got a 5,000 nuclear stockpile, 5,000 weapons. We can actually reduce that to several hundred. Again, that would help us to save tremendously. Bringing our troops home from war would save us billions of dollars on an annual basis, so that there are other places that I would start when you talk about making cuts before going to Social Security and Medicare.
Our final question from Peralt Paul.
We asked a bunch of our readers to submit questions for the candidates. And this reader, Neoshi, asks 4 questions. 1, are you 100% pro-choice? 2, do you support repealing the Defense of Marriage Act? 3, would you have voted for or against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? And would you be in favor of military action or the declaration of war against Iran?
First of all, I am absolutely pro-choice. I believe in a woman's right to choose. And in many instances, it's a very difficult choice that a woman has to make, and certainly it should be a choice that I believe that they perhaps should make by reaching out to someone that they trust. But ultimately, I believe that it's the woman's choice, and so I believe in a woman's right to choose. With respect to marriage, I believe in marriage equality. Personally, I don't have any reservations with respect to 2 consenting adults living together in a manner of their choosing so that they can truly express themselves and be happy. Obviously, I also look at it from a legal perspective, having served as a judge and a lawyer for the last 20 years. Legally speaking, our courts have deemed marriage to be a fundamental right. Consequently, I don't believe that you can deny or obstruct a fundamental right simply based on sexual orientation. With respect to the wars, I can't tell you whether or not I would have made the decision to go to war several years ago, because I'm sure, quite frankly, I didn't have access to the information that was out there.
Thank you. We'll have to leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We always give our candidates 30 seconds for closing statements. And again, as a reminder, John Lewis was unable to attend tonight, so we will hear our 30-second closing statement from Michael Johnson.
My wife, Allison, and I are raising 2 young children, and every single day, we not only think about providing for them and their opportunities and how it is that we're going to ensure that they get a great college education, we think about our own possibilities and opportunities and our ability to provide for ourselves as well as our aging parents. Now more than ever, we need to concentrate not on our past, which is not at stake, but our future. I want to go to Washington to work with our president to bring us those desperately needed federal funds and work for our citizens and give the 5th Congressional District a voice in Washington.
Michael Johnson, thank you. That
Thank
concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary election will be this Tuesday, July 31st. Our thanks to the candidate and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. This broadcast has been streamed and will be available on demand from GPB on GPB's website, gpb.org. I'm John Shearer. Thanks for joining us. The Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday. Have a great night.
GPB reminds you to vote in the primary election this Tuesday, July 31st.
This is a GPB original production.